Intimate Judaism is off this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode. In the meantime, enjoy this classic episode from 2020 with Rabbanit Oriya Mevorach entitled Tzniut, Modesty, Female Masturbation, and the Media. Intimate Judaism deals with sensitive topics and uses explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Intimate Judaism. I'm Tali Rosenbaum.
And I'm Rabbi Scott Kahn.
Today we are going to be discussing some really important topics regarding young women and sexuality, modesty, and female masturbation. And we're very excited to introduce our guest, Rabbanit Oriya Mevorach. Oriya teaches Torah and Judaism at many ulpanot here in Israel, at high schools for girls. She also teaches at Lindenbaum and Michlelet Herzog. Oriya is a doctoral student at Bar Ilan studying gender and philosophy, and she also is the author of a book. In Hebrew, it's called Ma'at Mevakeshet. In English, it is called What Are You Looking For? A Fresh Perspective on Love and Your Body. So first of all, let's introduce and welcome Rabbanit Oriya Mevorach. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, and I'm so excited to be here.
Before we get to today's discussion, let me first remind you to visit our website, intimatejudaism.com, for the full podcast archive, show notes, a free men's mikvah list, and more. We are very gratified that Intimate Judaism has become the starting point for many really important discussions about sex and intimacy and how they relate to halakha and Torah Judaism. Please help us continue to help people by sharing this podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or whatever other way you can get the word out. Please also go to Apple Podcasts and give us a good rating and review. It will really help us out. We also have an Intimate Judaism Patreon site. Patreon supporters get bonus material, episodes, merch, and more, and it's an opportunity for people who have benefited from Intimate Judaism to support our work with a small monthly payment, and you decide how much or how little to contribute. If you enjoy Intimate Judaism, please check out that Patreon page and consider becoming an Intimate Judaism patron. The link is in the description of this podcast. Please continue to send us your questions and comments to intimatejudaism@jewishcoffeehouse.com. Also visit jewishcoffeehouse.com and taliarosenbaum.com.
So let me start with our first question. You have a new book in which you talk about a unique new perspective on teaching young women. I say women because I don't like when they say girls, and then the minute you're married, you can be married at 35 and still be a girl, but once you're married, you're a woman, so I just say young women for everybody. So I think that you're providing a unique perspective for young women in high schools and in midrashot or post-high school programs in teaching about sexuality and teaching about modesty. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this unique approach that you present.
So over the last maybe 10 years, I think there's a great revolution in the religious society in Israel. And almost every institute understands that an open discourse and an open conversation between the educators and the students about sexuality is something that we must have and must do. But I think that till now, the sex education was focusing mainly on two layers or two aspects of sexuality, which are the body and the mind, or the body and the soul, while I am adding another layer to those really important aspects. When I say body, I mean the layer of physiology, maybe even sexology. When we study about our body in the sexual context, we usually focus on physiological knowledge. What you'll see in these lectures, you'll see pictures of the feminine body and the male body, and you'll see all these paradigms.
If you even get that much.
Yeah, and that's not enough, And then sometimes the contemporary discourse also talks about the soul, about how do we feel about sexuality? Do we feel shame or guilt or maybe happiness or joy? And how do we get it? And I accept this assumption that sexuality is a matter of body and soul, or body and mind. But I think What we're lacking till now is the very critical layer, the third layer, which is the cultural layer, what I call ideology. And when I say ideology, I mean mainly hidden or maybe implicit ideas or ideology that surrounds us. We get it through media, we get it through conversations on the street with our friends, and we don't even know how much we are affected by this ideology, because body and soul, they're affected by the way we think about them, the way we perceive them. What I'm trying to do in my book is to analyze those ideologies that we are all surrounded by. I'll say the 3 tools that I give in my book. The first tool is awareness. I want people to be aware to what I find as 6 different discourses that we are surrounded by. And if you want, I could give you an examples later. And after the awareness level, we progress to the alternative. Alternative is, okay, so if all those discourses are not good or offensive, maybe suppressive even, so what's the alternative? What does Judaism can tell us about healthy sexuality? And that's the alternative, which is very much based on Mekorot, Chazal, and halachically resources. And the third level is the resistance. Resistance means criticism. We criticize those discourses. We don't just need to recognize them. We want to also know what's the problem, to identify with those ideologies. So these are the 3 tools that I give in my book.
Oriya, can you give some examples of what some of those implicit ideologies are? What are these cultural messages that people are receiving subconsciously, and we may not even realize exactly what we're learning?
Right. So usually when we think about ideology, the modern concept of ideology only speaks about explicit ideology. When we think about ideology, we usually think, okay, so how can I know if I'm affected by this discourse? Maybe I should see if I'm doing the things that he recommends on. Let's think about the sexual liberation discourse. If I'm not sexually liberated, if I'm not having a sexual relationship with people who I'm not committed to, so maybe I'm not affected by this discourse. But the practical level is not how we examine the way we're affected by the discourse. We also do not examine this by the way of our agreement. Let's say someone is telling you, do you think that women should have sex with whoever they feel attracted to? And you say no. So you might think, okay, I'm not affected by this discourse. But that's a misconception. I want to say maybe modern misconception. So my field of cultural criticism says that the only parameter to know if you're affected by discourse or not is your understanding of its sentences, okay? If you understand the sentence, which I'll give you in a minute an example. If you understand it, then you're part of it. You're affected by it, even though if you're not agreeing with it. And
meaning the fact that you accept the sentence means you're part of the narrative. You're already within that system. The very fact that you understand what's being asked of you.
Right. And that's pretty, I don't know, maybe sad or depressing, because doing something is something that we choose to do or not to do. And also agreeing with an argument is something that we choose, but understanding something it's forced on us. We do not choose whether to understand something or not. And let me give you an example that I saw in the Israeli website, Ynet. It's a quote from Mariah Carey, the famous singer. She said, "I've been with only 5 men in my life. I'm innocent about the others." Okay.
I just want to clarify for our listeners, because it doesn't translate exactly. I think that the translation is, I've only been with 5 men. I'm much more innocent than most.
Right.
The more people you sleep with, the less innocent you are, the more guilty you are.
Right. When we read this sentence, we don't even have to agree, right? There's no level of agreement here. I do not agree. You weren't with 5 men, right? We don't need to agree to this. But if we'll analyze it, we'll see that this sentence is based on the presuppositions that see sexuality as opposed to innocence. Okay? When she says, I've been with only 5 men in my life. I'm innocent. We understand this sentence and we don't feel that it's strange or weird as if we said, I installed only 5 electric windows in my house. I'm innocent about the others. So when we understand the sentence, we actually understand the presuppositions that sexuality is opposed to innocence. And I think as a religious woman who always only experienced sexual relationship with my husband, I don't think that sexuality is opposed to innocence. I don't think that sexuality is something dirty, something that makes you not innocent. Also in English, I think when one loses his virginity, we say that she lost her innocence, right?
That can be said, yes.
It can be said.
Yeah. In Hebrew, it's less common, but again, okay, we hear this, okay, you're sexual, you're not innocent again. And also in English and in Hebrew, if someone is provocative, we call her, she's the bad girl or the bad woman.
Naughty,
exactly. And it's the only, I think the only field when you say to someone that he's bad or naughty, it's a compliment. We clap, okay, we clap for him. This example, it's a specific discourse that I call, it's the permissive discourse. There are 5 more, okay? But the permissive discourse give us the impression that sexuality is low and negative, but it's fun, so let's do it. When I say to my best friend, I tell her, last night I had an erotical dream, and she'd tell me, oh, you have a dirty mind, okay? Why do we call it dirty?
So, Oriya, if I can just paraphrase what you're saying, even if, let's say, a teacher, a chatan teacher or a kala teacher were to use those same terms in a positive sense, saying it's okay to have a dirty mind with your spouse, we're already buying into the fundamental idea that this is something dirty. That's the subconscious messaging that you're talking about.
Right. That's even only textual example, but also we can speak about the visual aspect. When we are in the permissive discourse, what we see visually is usually women that expose themselves in a way that puts them in a humiliating way. When we watch some YouTube clips, usually it comes from hip hop music, okay? The sexuality is very, very explicit, but it's also combines even semiotically with the ideas of humiliation, stupidity, okay? You cannot imagine the singer as an intellectual woman, right? So that's the permissive discourse, but it's not the only discourse. Of course, we have the exact opposite discourse, which I call the discourse of the sublime. That discourse is not, usually we won't find it in the hip hop scene. We'll find it in the art or maybe a high cultural scene that will speak about sexuality and nudity in a very high language. And it's not a problem to expose your body and to be sexual because you are partying, you're feminine, and it's empowering you, okay? I think that Nicki Minaj or Cardi B won't use such intelligent words to describe their sexuality. The contrary, they'll use very low words and it'll be part of a fun environment. But here, at the discourse of sublime, you'll describe it very, very highly. And I think that what makes this discourse very attractive for religious people, because they used to think about sexuality as something divine, right? And then someone says, but it doesn't have to be only in marriage. What, if you expose your body on the stage as a part of a theater, scene, what's the problem? It's something very, very artistic, something very high. We can write articles about your body. So let's ask, what's the problem about it? I write it and I analyze it in my book. I'm trying to give an answer to it. Also in movies, okay? If we'll ask our students, when you see sexual scenes in movies, do you feel that this is low or high? Is it respectful for women or is it humiliating for them? So they'll probably say it depends on the movie, right? Some movies will show us very low sexuality and some movies will not show us low sexuality. It's an amazing couple they have great connection with each other, and they're not married, and they're having sex in this, and it looks so beautiful. And that's the discourse of the sublime, and we must also recognize it.
This is really interesting. I did read through your book, so I'm familiar with some of these concepts that you're talking about. I'm not a sex educator, but where it does bring me is I connect with looking at sexuality also from the body and mind and soul, and you're very much adding in the component of society and culture. And I think that we really do need to be aware of to what extent culture and society affect the way we perceive sex because of the messages that we do receive from the media and from everything around us. What we're talking about really in this discussion, though, are sexual values. What are our values about sex? How do we view sex and sexuality as something that could be taken to a place where women or men can be objectified? It could be taken to a place where sex can be coercive. It could be taken to a place where sex can be a place of using another person, or it can be taken to a place that's very erotic. That could be taken to a place that's very intimate. It can be taken to a place that's very holy, even, as you said, sublime. The thing is that sexuality here is more like the subject than the object in the discussion. It really depends on the context. So assuming that, you're going to talk about the different ways to look at the sexual discourse, whether it's puritanical or whether it's artistic or whether it's permissive, or I know you have 6 and you can kind of go through the other ones. But what I'm interested in is what you can tell us about how you practically teach the concepts to your students, the concepts of the body, the concepts of Tzniut, for example, and the concepts of sexual arousal and masturbation. Specifically.
Let's begin with Tzniut. And the same thing we did with Mariah Carey, lehavdil, let's do it with the Modesty, the Tzniut discourse. Okay, so I'll give you a few examples of how our children or our students or our young women can listen to an idea, to a common idea or a common sentence, and understand it as a Puritan message. Okay, when I say Puritan, I mean an ideology that says that sexuality is just something low, something humiliating. They can hear their rabbi or the Ulpana teacher say, in Judaism, sexuality is so holy and divine only in marriage. But while you're out there, you shouldn't be sexual because men will fall into a hirurei avera, prohibited fantasies. And I think that this justification for Tzniut is terrible. Of course, there are prohibited fantasies. And also, of course, the dressing immodesty could lead to these prohibited fantasies, but it's not the reason, it's not the deep reason why we do dress modestly. Okay, so maybe if we get to it, I'll give you a small, maybe tools to think about the real or maybe the healthy reason, which I'm trying to give in my book. But first, I want us to hear some sentences, and you tell me, what do you think they hear through those sentences? Okay, so we tell them, cover yourself. It's sexual. How does she understand it? What does she hear? She hears my body's sexuality is a crime that needs to be covered. Okay, maybe we didn't mean it. We didn't mean to say it's a crime that needs to be covered, but she hears this because she's exposed to 6 discourses that are not accurate, and they mess with her soul and ideology, and they leave her feeling that covering myself is as if I'm covering a very negative character of myself.
Something that's shameful.
Well,
yeah,
it's sexualizing. It's sexualizing. I mean, that's the complaint about putting tights on 3-year-old girls, that it sexualizes them.
Right. And then it sexualizes me, and sexuality is something so bad that I need to cover. So leave me alone. Don't sexualize me and don't tell me to cover it. Okay, that's many of my students tell me this, and I understand. Okay, another example. We tell her, respect yourself. Put something on yourself, respect yourself. How does she understand it? She feels that respect is something that is opposed to humiliation. My sexuality is humiliating, and if I'll expose it, it'll hurt my respect, okay? Third example, we tell her Tzniut is a part of the midos. It's not about sexuality. It's about humbleness. It's about distance us from pride, okay? It's so common. I hear it all the time. And she understands it first. They don't want to talk to me about sexuality. They ignore it. It's embarrassing to them. So they say something about pride, but the most, I think, maybe severe or a terrible understanding is that, okay, so if covering myself means a humbleness, then maybe I should also hide and conceal my presence and my voice, not to speak and not to be active.
Well, that's also kol isha. Your voice is sexual, ki kolech arev u'mareh naveh. Hide it.
Hide it, exactly, hide it.
And Oriya, we see not only the women themselves or the young women themselves internalize this message, but the men in our communities very often internalize the exact same message. And
Mamash.
Someone living in Ramat Beit Shemesh, I can say, the magazines blurring out any pictures of women, no matter how old they are, is the exact same message, just internalized by men as well as women.
Exactly. And I want to tell you something, Rabbi Scott, that when my students, which belong usually to the more liberal streams, they never meet this blurring of women in their Bet Knesset or their community. And when they see it on a Haredic newspaper, they'll say, oh, that's not us. That's not what we do. But I think that if they don't understand exactly the differences between their discourse and this discourse, one day they'll get up in the morning and ask themselves, wait a minute, so if modesty is not about blurring my presence, what is it about? And if they don't have good answers to this, they'll find themselves, I think, maybe not connecting to their body, or maybe not connecting to the modest concept.
Another consequence of the same idea, I'm sure that many people who find the blurring of women to be offensive say that's because I'm not that religious. In other words, if I were more Torani, if I were more Orthodox, if I were more religious, then of course I would agree that we should blur one's face. In other words, it's understood as actually a positive value gone too far for them, as opposed to a perversion of an actual value.
Right, exactly. And in my book, I write that usually when we say when we see chumra and kula, so usually it's like a realm that we really want to progress in the chumra area, but specifically in the sexual area, it's wrong to see the chumra as the right target that we need to aim ourselves to. It's wrong because it's not about being more tzadikah, but exactly the opposite. It distances you from Hashem. I really think so. I think that blurring women, it's something that distances you from Hashem.
You've mentioned some of the negative messages that are implicit in so many of the sentences that young women are taught. Can you tell us and our listeners what you would replace them with? What are the positive sentences you would say instead in teaching Tzniut and modesty?
Okay, so here it's a little bit depressing because almost no matter what you say, if they're not really familiar with the healthy Jewish discourse of sexuality, you'll say one thing and they'll hear something completely different. Okay, so I'm not just going to say the sentences. I'll sit and learn with them all the mekorot, and we'll analyze them, and we'll take out from them all the right principles, all the healthy principles. Okay, so if you want, I can give you an example from a few mekorot.
Please.
Okay, so when we speak about shmirat ha'enaim, usually if you ask a boy or a girl, why does a man have to not to look at non-modest women? So the answer would probably be, because of hirurei avera, because of prohibited fantasies. Because it's a sin, it's very low, it's humiliating this woman. Do you want to be objectified? Of course not. It's so good for us that men are obliged to not to look at you, okay?
Because we're like diamonds.
Yeah, and then you're like diamonds, and then of course my student asked me once, I don't know what about you, but if I had a diamond, you would know about it, right? Because we don't even hide diamonds, so I don't understand why this metaphor became so popular. But if we look at the Torah and also in Chazal, we see many places that Shmirat HaEinayim is mentioned. It sounds not related to sexuality, but then the Mekorot themselves, they combine it with sexuality. And let's think about Moshe asks from Hashem, Hare'eni na kvodecha, this very dense word, kavod, techabdi et atzmech, right? So Moshe asks from Hashem, show me your respect, okay, your kavod. And Hashem says, Lo yir'eni adam v'chai. No one can see me and live. He doesn't say, oh, of course I'm not going to show you myself because it's humiliating. And he also doesn't say, I'm afraid you're going to fall into hirurei avera, prohibited fantasies. It's not about that. He can't look at something, but not because it's low, but because it's divine or it's holy, okay? Let's think about the Ark of Covenant. Also, Kohen HaGadol, he cannot straight gaze at this covenant. The ark must be covered with smoke and also with parochet, right? And you can't just look at it. I'm asking my students, what's going to happen if he'll see the ark, except from dying probably? It's not leading to any humiliation of no Shekhinah, right? The Shekhinah cannot be humiliated. What it can be is maybe, in Hebrew I will say, mechulelet milshon chol, but it becomes chol, it becomes not kadosh. And my students can say, but what are you talking about, Moshe, Aron HaEdut? And also, let me give you a few examples, and then we see how it's connected to sexuality. But also, Gemara says that keshet, we cannot look at the rainbow because the Shekhinah is shora on this keshet.
The divine presence is present and exists somehow within that rainbow or upon the rainbow, according to our tradition.
Right, exactly. And also at the Kohanim that bless the community, we cannot look at them because also the Shekhinah is there. So my students can ask me, so what are you talking about this topics? It's not about sexuality, and then I show them that the Mekorot themselves bring it to sexuality. All the sugya of Aron HaEdut is a very, very sexual and even erotical sugya. And I show it in the book. And also,
what's in the Kadosh Kodashim? I mean, it's the Kruvim. It's also erotic.
Also they're the Kruvim. And also they say specifically that Aron HaEdut is it's like the woman's body. The wood rose that holds it are like the breasts. Okay, and the parochet is like the clothing. Okay, they say it explicitly, and then they mention the word tzniut, and they say that Aron HaEdut is just like a woman that should be sanua and expose herself only to her husband. And then they deal with it. They ask, what's going to happen if Aron HaEdut will be open and seen by everyone? What's going to happen to it? And they say something really sad is going to happen because the female sexuality is going to go through trivialization, okay? It's not going to be as holy or as exciting as it could be if we take Aron HaEdut, the Ark of Covenant, and just put it in every part of the city, maybe duplicated, okay? I'm telling it to my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter, heard me asking her, what do you think is going to happen if we're taking this Ark and we duplicate it, and then we put it in every corner of the street? Is it going to be special for us to see it? And then she says, oh, no, it's not going to be special anymore. And then I'm applying to the discourse of sublime, and I'm asking them, how can something be sublime if it's under every tree and every corner? How can it stay sublime? It could be beautiful. I'm not saying it's not beautiful, but holy? Come on. It's not holy. And then I'm asking her, my daughter, you know that we can look at the Aron only 3 times a year. And she knows it's Shloshet HaRegalim, Sukkot, Shavuot, Pesach. What's going to happen to this excitement when we look at the Aron HaEdut if we see it every day? And then suddenly we need to go to Jerusalem again, seeing Arona Edut. It's not special. We're not going to like or love Sukkot anymore.
It's kind of like the Cocoa Krispies on Shabbat. If you give it to the kids every single day, then it's not special on Shabbat anymore. It's like plain Cheerios.
Right. But you know what? This is such a great example. But that takes us also to Shmirat Shomer Negia. Just a little bit. I'm going to touch this topic just a little bit. Sometimes we think that Shmirat Negia makes it really special, makes the cereals really special, makes the sexuality really special. But actually, what happens in Judaism is not only the cereals become special, but also the Shabbat.
Not only is the cereal itself special, but the framework in which it exists, Shabbat, becomes special.
Right. It makes your Shabbat special. It makes your Sukkot or your Shavuot special if you see the arc. So the sexuality mat'ina et hanisu'in b'mashma'ut kedusha.
The sexuality loads the marriage with a certain amount of holiness.
Exactly. It's not just about holy sexual relationship. It's about holy marriage, holy love, holy brit.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at Tzniut, looking at the specialness of your body and the specialness of the sexual act between a man and a woman at the right time who are married, and kind of differentiating that from sex as a mundane act. We had another question that we wanted to ask about, and that has to do with female masturbation, because it's been our understanding that you've spoken about this. I know that we don't have such definitive sources about it like there is for men regarding the prohibition of it. Is it allowed? Should it be encouraged even? And I know that you've spoken about it, you've written about it. What could you share with our listeners regarding your approach to female masturbation as what I might say is a normal developmental process? I would say that about men as well. What do you write about?
It's a great question, because sometimes I hear also my students tell me, I don't think Chazal know that I have a sexual desire. I don't think they recognize it. I don't think they know that women can also masturbate or have fantasies. How do they get to this conclusion? Because it's not forbidden. And then I tell them, no, it's not. That's not the reason why it's not forbidden. They know, Chazal know, and we can have many examples to it. But they certainly know that you have sexual desire, but they're not forbidding you from researching it, as opposed to men that are forbidden. And I explain it in also cultural terms. I think that they know that feminine sexuality is very different from male sexuality. I think one of the most amazing differences is the one that I recently read about, that men can see a part of women's body and they can become aroused by it. It could cause sexual stimulation only by one part of a female's body. They don't have to see the whole woman to feel this stimulation, but women, not only the stimulation itself is much less available to them, but they're not stimulated this way. They don't just look at males, I don't know, leg or arm and feel something in their origins, right? It's not how it works. What they can feel is desire or attraction. And we have to differentiate between desire and stimulation. The healthy Jewish discourse actually says that there's nothing wrong with desire, but there's a problem about stimulation to men, okay? And then you can be very beautiful. You can be very attractive as long as you're wearing something modest. You can make someone feel attracted to you. And if he's married and he's attracted to you, it's not a problem of modesty. It's a problem of not tachmod. That's the problem here. So how does it relate to feminine masturbation? I think that Chazal knew that if they prohibited feminine masturbation, they'll prevent women the ability to even be aware of how it feels to be aroused. There's a very long explanation
I read an article over Shabbat that you had sent us, and it seems to be that what you're saying is that the rabbis understood that women almost need some self-guidance in order to experience arousal, that they're not going to naturally necessarily get aroused in the same way that young men just get aroused by visual stimuli. And so because they will become more aroused by context, by fantasy, by romance, they might not even necessarily go to that place of genital arousal. So by restricting that, that could actually cut off a woman's experience of sexuality, and not restricting that would allow her to develop sexually in preparation for marriage.
Exactly.
Am I saying that correctly based on what I read?
Exactly. And let me tell you something. I just finished a lecture in Ulpena, and I spoke to 17-year-old girls, and I asked them what's the difference between desire and stimulation, or between desire and arousal. And some of the girls understood exactly what I'm talking about. I spoke about sometimes we can feel something in our genitals, something there. So that's stimulation, that's arousal. And if you look at some guy and he's handsome and he's interesting and you feel this excitement, is that the same thing as feeling this arousal in your genitals? And they say, oh no, I know how it feels to be attracted to someone. But some of them, I think maybe half of the class didn't know what am I talking about when I explained how does it feel to be aroused. They know how it feels to feel attracted to someone or to desire someone, but they don't know nothing about their genitals and how it feels when it's aroused. So I think that Chazal knew that if they prohibit women from exploring this, exactly just like Tali said, they'll come to their marriage and to their love life without even being able to feel satisfied or to feel happy. I told those girls, it's amazing that if I would ask the same question, and I'm not doing this because I'm not speaking to guys, but if I had a class of boys and I asked them, do you know how it feels when your genitals are getting aroused? Everyone would feel that, everyone. So there's a tremendous gap between male sexuality and feminine sexuality, and I think Chazal understood it.
Then I want to ask you a question as a follow-up. In your article, you describe male sexuality as a raging river, which needs sometimes some barriers and dams to hold it back from overflowing the banks. And in contrast, in that same article, you say that female sexuality is more like a well, where the water needs to be taken up actively in order for it to be used, and there's no real fear of the well overflowing the edges. So what that means to me, and please tell me if I'm wrong, I almost got the impression from your article that it's not merely that, in your opinion, Chazal allowed female fantasy and masturbation, but perhaps even encouraged it, or at least you're saying it should be encouraged, because otherwise it's going to remain submerged, and it's important for young women to learn about their sexuality and about the concept of arousal as it applies to them practically. Is that true? Are you saying that?
I don't think it's right. I don't think it's accurate to say that Chazal was encouraging these fantasies, but Chazal also knew when not to speak. They really knew when not to say it's forbidden, and when they say it's not forbidden. Also, the Rishonim and also Shulchan Aruch, they don't mention it. They don't say a word about it. And then halachic discussions about prohibited fantasies, halachic discussions, most of them say that women does not have this prohibition. So I think they just know how to let women do what they want and need to do, and just not interfere with their natural sexuality.
And you say that there isn't a lot in the Shulchan Aruch about women, so they must have left it out on purpose. I think it's also a certain mindset about women as more the object here, but it's speaking to men. Right.
Bidyuk. They speak to men and they say, okay, you know what? Women, I think maybe they were even humble and said, we're not entirely understand women, okay? we don't understand the feminine sexuality. We just know what's happening when a woman is not familiar with her body. We know what happens, and we don't want this to happen.
But ultimately, I think, Tali, it's also fair to say that our general attitude, even though people often think the opposite, our general attitude in halacha is that if it's not prohibited, you assume it's allowed. We don't assume the opposite. We don't assume if you have to ask, it's got to be asur, it's got to be prohibited. If Chazal didn't tell us it's prohibited, I don't think there's reason for us to go and say, well, had they thought about it, had they been speaking to women, surely they would have forbidden this too. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's probably the opposite. Let's assume, unless we have reason to believe otherwise, that if Chazal didn't say it's prohibited, it's probably permitted.
Yeah, Chazal was familiar with feminine masturbation. They were speaking about nashim mesulalot. I think we can be sure that if they thought that feminine masturbation is not allowed, they would say it. I'm sure about it. And also, some of the Rishonim read a certain sugya from Nida as a heter, permission for feminine masturbation. Even though Chazal maybe didn't say it explicitly, some of the Rishonim say, here they say it's allowed.
Oh, I could talk for another hour or two on this, but I think that we need to wrap up. I think it's an interesting discussion. I mean, I think that we should probably summarize it because we're out of time.
In that case, let me just say one thing quickly, almost by way of summary or conclusion. I'm very interested to see how our listeners react to this particular episode because Tali and I have had the experience of seeing that our an early episode about male masturbation, received a lot of comment. More people approached me to discuss that particular episode than any other episode. And I mean, in particular, the people who approached me were very often teachers, mechanichim, others who wanted to say, well, how do we deal with this? Because it's such an acute issue. I'm curious if we're going to find the same thing is true for this discussion of female masturbation, if this is also an issue which needs to be discussed that we're hopefully bringing out into the open.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something interesting. 10 years ago, I was teaching in a midrasha, and it was before I started my research and writing the book. It was really in the beginning of my way. We spoke about sexuality, and we spoke about male masturbation and hotzaat zera levatala, and we spoke about marriage and how much it's beautiful that we keep our sexuality to marriage. And then one girl raised her hand and asked, what about feminine masturbation? And I felt it was overwhelming. Everyone was just quiet, and I was also very embarrassed. And I said, okay, you know what? Let me prepare something for next shiur, and we'll talk about it. But I thought, how come we can talk about male masturbation with no guilt or shame or whatever, and about feminine masturbation we don't even speak about it? And I think it's because of the halachic discourse that does not speak about it, and we sometimes feel as if it's a hashtaka, it's a quieting the feminine sexuality, whilst it's exactly the opposite. They're not quieting it, they're letting it to be really free. But if the halacha doesn't speak about it, I think that if we talk about it with our students, and I can tell it from my experience, they will be so grateful to us because at least, I don't know.
Well, because they're alone, because they're doing it and they're feeling guilty about it because nobody talks about it. So that's why we do this podcast too.
Right.
If there are young women out there or not so young women out there, teenagers who are listening to this podcast and they're wondering, they might be feeling even as young women. I mean, we've talked a lot about guilt and shame in regard to male masturbation. But if you're a young woman and you masturbate, now we have Eshet Halacha, who's on the air with us, letting us know that this is not a halachic problem at all, and this is part of development, and it's normal. And there are a lot of different reasons why it's done, by the way. It's not just necessarily sexual. It's about self-soothing. It's about relaxation. And it's certainly a way to get to know yourself and your body in a way that prepares you for marriage. And I think that you're very right about, for young men, it's very bolet, it's very out there, it's very external. Their self-exploration perhaps comes more naturally. Thank you so much. Do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Thank you so much. I want to say that my book is also going to be published in English.
Oh, excellent. Great.
Yeah, next year, in Elul next year, Bezrat Hashem.
Rabbanit Oriya Mevorach, thank you very much for joining us today on Intimate Judaism. This is very enlightening. I learned a lot, so thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Make sure to visit our website, intimatejudaism.com, for the full podcast archive, show notes, a free men's mikveh list, and more. We're honored and gratified that this podcast has become the starting point for many important discussions about sex and intimacy, how they relate to Torah Judaism. Please help continue to help people by sharing this podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any other way you can get the word out to as many people as possible. Please also think of joining our Intimate Judaism Patreon site. Patreon supporters get bonus material, episodes, merch, and more, and it's an opportunity for people who benefit from Intimate Judaism to support the work that Tali and I do with a small monthly payment, and you decide how much or how little. If you enjoy Intimate Judaism, please check out the Patreon page. The link is in the description of the podcast as well as in the show notes, and we thank you in advance and hope you enjoy the bonus material that's there. Please send us your questions and comments to intimatejudaism@jewishcoffeehouse.com. Make sure to visit jewishcoffeehouse.com as well as Tali's website, talirosenbaum.com. Thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Bye.